Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Man creates many of his own dilemmas, not necessarily purposefully, but because his vision is limited and because he insists on holding on to a limited vision. He refuses to expand his vision. If you take a lame man, a man who can't walk, and you pick him up and you bring him to another spot, he'll be in the same position he was as he was in the previous spot. He can't walk. He can't move. He can't follow a path. Religious fanaticism is very similar to being lame. It stops you from being able to move forward on a path. It holds you in place. And the arrogance of religious fanaticism insists that it's appropriate. So when you have the insistence of the appropriate nature of something that's incorrect floating within you, and you feel you have to defend it, you have in essence locked yourself in to a space and you can't move beyond it. You can't go beyond that space. You're stuck in the same way that a lame man can't walk. Why is it so difficult for humanity to understand that the human race is one race, that everyone is part of that human race, that all men are created by Allah, and that Allah is within all men. But men have this need to somehow separate themselves from others, to isolate themselves from others, to identify themselves as different than others, and they think that this identification will make them more important. There is a certain arrogance that comes from believing that you belong to a unique club, that you belong to a unique subset of humanity that is somehow better than all the other subsets of humanity. And this arrogance is overwhelming within people, and it's spread all around the world. And it comes from ignorance. It comes from believing in things that aren't real. For instance, the mind is limited into what it can see. It can see the world. The intellect is limited in what it can see. It can see the world. It can't see beyond that. So where will the mind and the intellect take you? They'll take you to philosophy. And what is philosophy? Philosophy is conjecture about how things may be. Philosophy is not reality. And because of this constant need for the mind to create conjecture and then give reality to this conjecture, we end up with all kinds of theories of civilization, all kinds of theories of existence, all kinds of ideas that many of which cause tremendous problems in the world. Bawa would often talk about how man philosophized communism, and then other men tried to implement this philosophy and the disasters that it caused around the world. But that's not the only one. Man philosophizes that his religion is somehow superior to every other religion, that his race is somehow superior to every other race, that his language is somehow superior to every other language, that his nationality is somehow superior to every other nationality. And as we do this, as we incorporate arrogance into the definition of ourselves, because we define ourselves by race and nationality and religion, as we do this to make ourselves greater and greater, we are actually diminishing ourselves and making ourselves less and less. We are holding back our true self. We have attached ourselves to, in a very real sense, material things, as if these material things can take us to the next level in our existence. We begin to believe that our conjectures as to truth are reality, when in fact, unless we have incorporated all of humanity into our belief system, unless we've incorporated the essential essence of the fact that all men are one race and all men are unified and there are no divisions and there are no separations, unless we've incorporated that into our being, we have segregated, separated, divided ourselves off, not only from the rest of mankind, but from God. Since God is with everyone, when we divide ourselves off from everyone, we divide ourselves off from God. And we have forgotten what our true self is. And somehow we have to begin to recognize what our true self is and understand that this world will not satisfy us, can't satisfy us, and can't take us into the next realm of existence, and that we are always subject to what Allah has in store for us. There was a Shah of Iran, that's like the king, and he saw a beautiful woman walking near his palace, and he said to one of his ministers, find out who she is and bring her here, and I want to make her one of my wives. And they did a little research, and they found out that the woman was in fact married. And then they advised him that it would not be appropriate for him to become involved with a married woman. So they devised a scheme that would bring an end to her husband. And they found out he was a carpenter. So the minister suggested that the king send him an order to produce a certain number of cabinets by a certain date. And if he didn't produce them by that date, then he would be done away with. He would be killed. So they sent the order to the carpenter, and the carpenter got the order and he looked at it, and it asked for 8 cabinets, each of which would take him about a month to build. And they asked for all 8 within 1 month. It was an impossible task. And at the end of the missive, the end of the letter to him, it told him that he would be killed if he didn't accomplish this. And he told his wife about this. And his wife asked him if he had done anything to offend the king or offend anybody. And he says, I'm very careful not to offend anybody. I'm very careful in my words, and I'm very careful in my acts. And his wife told him to be strong and to believe in God, because if he hadn't done anything wrong, Allah would protect him. Well, time went on, and the day for these cabinets to be delivered had come, and there was a knock on his door, and the guards of the Shah entered the house, and he fell to his knees because he hadn't even driven one nail to make one cabinet, because he knew the task was impossible. And he said to the men, I haven't been able to fulfill the request of the Shah, and I'm ready to go with you. And the men said, the orders have changed. There's a new Shah now. The old Shah passed, and now you have to create a coffin for the old Shah. So when we think we can control this world, when we think we have power in this world beyond men, when we think we can upset the normal way of things, we lose touch with reality, because we put our arrogance ahead of truth. We put our arrogance ahead of God, and God can intercede at any moment, at any time. He can bring about situations that are different than we perceive. And that's why we have to learn to become small. That's why we have to learn to become obedient to our Lord and understand our place in things. What we need to do is move forward on this path towards truth. And fortunately for us, we have had in our life a sheikh, a katub, who tells us the truth about this path of life. And one of the mainstays of what he explains to us is that you are not what you see. You can't look into a mirror and say, that's me, because that's not you. And as long as you believe that's me, you are lost, and you are trying to accomplish things with your body that your body can't do. The body has a limited time span and will disappear. Now, in this world, Allah has created millions upon millions of energies, and man has access to these energies. But all of these energies have short terms to them. They die off in the same way this body dies off. And as long as we deal with energies that dissipate, as long as we deal with energies that disappear, then we are going to disappear. So somehow we have to take on the understanding that we are something other than we see, something other than our eyes behold, something other than our perception tells us that we are. This is a difficult thing to do. Just like the Shah believed he could do anything he wanted to do. And if he wanted this woman, he could have her because he was the king and the king could move things. Well, the king can't move things, and either can we move things beyond that which Allah allows. There was one of the rightfully guided caliphs who every time he left the mosque had somebody shout at him, remember, you are under God's control. Remember, you are under his dominion. Remember, you are limited in your time span and you have to answer for your deeds. He insisted among his flock that they hear that he, even though he was the caliph, is under the dominion of Allah, under the control of Allah, and a servant to Allah. And as we walk through this life, we have to understand that our servanthood, we are not bosses in this world. We are not the ones who have control in this world. Control is with Allah. Control is through Allah, and only Allah has that power. Now, we also are not even what we appear to be, but because of the fanaticism that we have in religious doctrine, the fanaticism that we have in nationalities, the fanaticisms that we have in race, the belief systems of superiority of one over the other, over the other, over the other, we have created a hierarchy that has to do with this body. We've created a hierarchy that has to do with this elemental form. Now, within us, we have this light body, which is really who we are, but we also have all of the animals that are within creation. They are all within us, and they are all made of the same elements as this elemental body. We see God's artistry all around us. We see his creation all around us, and we become enamored by this artistry and all of this creation, and we fall in love with this artistry and all of this creation, and we lose sight of the fact that there is a creator behind all this who is a power that we can't see, a power that animates everything that we see, a power that gives life to everything that we see, a power that sustains, maintains everything that we see, a power that created everything that we see. But to understand this power, we have to be able to go beyond what vision shows us and what our ears hear and what our nose smells and what our tongue tastes and what our fingers sense. We have to be able to go beyond that. We have to understand the true path. And the true path is to find the light body that is within us. And how do we go about doing that? How do we go about finding that light body, finding that reality, and finding our true self? We are told by our sheikh that insan kamil, or man, is not what we see. Insan kamil, or true man, is this light body that is within us. And until we reach the state of that light body, we don't act as true man. We act through the creation, and the creation, by its very nature, the elemental part of the creation, has an arrogance in it because of its belief that it is somehow self-sustained, because it cannot see beyond itself. This body can't understand beyond itself. So we need to find a methodology to be able to find beyond ourselves. What's inside of us is the entire universe. Our true self is the light part. The rest is creation. The rest is the animal qualities. The rest is the lower self. Too often, man sides with his lower self as if that was who he is. So he sides with the enemy of truth. The enemy of truth is our lower self. The enemy of man is animal qualities. The enemy of man is the inability to be unified with all of existence. This is man's enemy. And we have to understand that. So we have to, instead of separating ourselves from humanity, separate ourselves from the enemies of humanity. We have to separate ourselves from that which isn't real. And this takes wisdom and consciousness and an analysis that goes beyond intellect. And so the question comes up for each of us: how do we go beyond intellect? How do we go beyond the mind? How do we go to the place where the I disappears, where the egocentric self disappears, where divine consciousness enters into our being, as opposed to worldly consciousness? In other words, how do we enter into wisdom as opposed to the worldly understanding of things? And this is at the core of what Sufism is about. Sufism is to find that light body within you so that you see perspective from the light body, not perspective from the world. The perspective from the world has to do with gaining the world. The perspective from the light has to do with losing the world. Pretty opposite ideas, pretty opposite attempts at finding truth or finding satisfaction or finding peace. So true peace is going to be found when we leave attachments, when we leave the world, when we leave our need for praise and blame, when we leave our need for wealth and fame, when we leave our need for the things of the world. And what will allow us to do this? And this is where Zikr comes in. The remembrance of Allah comes in. The understanding of reality comes in. The understanding of truth comes in. And what is the core of this remembrance of God, of this remembrance of the truth? It begins with La ilaha illallah. Except for you, nothing exists. And what are we supposed to do with that phrase? What are we supposed to do with that understanding? We have breath, and we're supposed to repeat that phrase with our breath. We take it in through our right nostril, and we exhale through our left nostril. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Nothing exists but you, O God, and you are all that is. Nothing exists but you, O God, and you are all that is. Now, the tip of the tongue can recite these words. The nostrils take the breath in and out. Now, if we can get ourselves to a still, quiet place, and if we can concentrate on the meaning of these words, that nothing exists but God, and God is all there is, and we can proclaim these words through our breath and through our tongue and through the air coming in and out of us, and we can bring ourselves to a place of extreme quiet and extreme serenity and extreme contentment and extreme patience, and we can sit in stillness and recite and continue to recite in a more and more subtle way. This repetition will go from words to a resonance. That resonance will fill our entire body. That resonance will go through each and every one of our pores. That resonance will overwhelm us to where that is all that exists, and we lose touch with the world. And this exercise is something we have to attempt to do. So first, the words are repeated without sound by the movement of the tongue. La ilaha illallah. And at first you can say it, but then it becomes part of your consciousness. The words are just in your consciousness. They're not said out loud. And the breath at first is strong, and then the breath becomes more and more subtle, more and more refined, more and more quiet, and consciousness takes over. The consciousness of wisdom, divine consciousness, which understands truth and which sees truth. When this occurs within us, we begin to transcend from this world of form to the world of light, to the world of formlessness. But to do this, we have to enter into a space where we detach ourselves from all that is around us, and we detach ourselves from that I that permeates all of our being and that constantly invades our consciousness and our space as if it were real. So as we drop that I, as we lose contact with that I, as we enter into the unified field of existence where everything that exists is as one, we begin to become real, and we begin to have a perspective that changes our attitude towards existence and changes who it is we are as a being. And this is when we begin to touch the light form that is within us. And when we touch the light form that is within us, that light form, even with our eyes closed, can see everything around us. That light form has no limits. That light form is so large, so expansive, that is beyond our ability to comprehend its effulgence and its immensity. But as long as the I remains within us, we can't escape into that form. We are trapped in the elemental form. So we need to release ourselves from the elemental form to become free. We have to give up our attachment to the elemental form to become free. And in this place, we are beyond the scope of religion. We have entered into the realm of power and light, God's power and God's light, God's truth and God's reality, God's qualities, and the understanding of what God is. This is when the divine begins to pray to the divine. This is when the world leaves us, and what is left is our true self, which is the ray that came from that light that was brought into us and is part of us and is part of everyone else. This soul that is God's ray begins to express itself in reality through divine consciousness, through a divine understanding, through becoming an example of reality, through becoming reality. Step by step, we go from the world to the light. We go from the form to the formless. We go from worldly power to godly power. We go from worldly understandings to divine understandings. We leave our arrogance. We leave our jealousy. We leave our hastiness. We leave our anger. We have no enemies any longer. We have no need for praise. We have no need for fame. We have no need for the treasures of the world, because now we understand that God's treasures are the only true treasures in existence and the only true treasures that we need. Compassion overwhelms our being. Mercy overwhelms our being. Kindness and love overwhelms our being. And we vibrate to the resonance of those qualities and leave the gross resonance of the form and of the world. And this is something we need to do on a regular basis. This is an exercise that we need to commit ourselves to. We have to bring ourselves to this place of quiet where we leave the world constantly in order to understand reality. And when we do this on a regular basis, certain things will begin to happen to us. We will become less interested in the world. We'll become less attached to the world. We'll have less stress in the world. All of the things that the world causes us, all of the difficulties, will begin to disappear from us because we no longer think we need them. We will stop inflicting wounds on ourselves through our own arrogance. We will stop inflicting pain on ourselves through our own misconceptions, because now we'll be able to see the truth. God has no enemies. We will have no enemies. God is love. We will become love. This is the path that has been laid out for us. But instead, so many men choose the path of arrogance, choose the path of separation, choose the path of division. And that's why we have all the wars that we have in the world. That's why we have all of the difficulties that we have in the world. That's why we have all the animosities and the enmity we have in this world, because we don't truly love our brother, because we set ourselves as higher and more important. Bawa would often say, I am the most insignificant, discarded being in the universe, meaning that he separated himself off from everything that separates man from man. And we need to separate ourselves off from everything that separates man from man. This was the path that the holy ones took. This was the path of Rumi. This was the path of Ibn Arabi. This was the path of Abdul Qadir Jilani. This was the path of Bawa Muhaiyaddeen. And this should become the path of each and every one of us. Become the light. Be the light. You are the light. Now recognize that light. May each of us see this and see it quickly, and may Allah make it easy for us. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.